Shalom. So you might want to be the one to call page numbers.
I will take care of the page calling.
Are you reading Torah?
I will be your Torah reader, yes.
Great.
All right. So it seems we're live on live stream and people are joining us on Zoom from the waiting room. So we welcome people who are joining us on YouTube, and thank you, Hector, for letting people in from the waiting room on Zoom as well. Whoever might be with us. It's the Shabbat between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, so quite the Shabbat for people who are stalwarts and committed ones. So we say Shabbat Shalom to all of our stalwarts and to anybody who might be watching on YouTube. We have a significant crowd usually there. Wait just a moment before beginning. Okay, so we'll begin Mincha this afternoon. We are blessed with several rabbinic residents this year. Jackie Honig is going to lead us today in Mincha for Shabbat afternoon and also teach us for this afternoon. So we begin on page 214 in Lev Shalem, page 226 in Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals, and page 558 in the older Sim Shalom.
Ashrei Shvitecha, Odialu Chasala, Ashrem Shagachalo, Ashrem Shadonai Elohav, Tila David. Tila Daber Pi, Vivarach Obasar Shem Kotra Lelam Vahed, Vanach Univarach Yaham, Hatavir Olam, Hallelujah. Uvalation, Galu Shepashari Kovner Madonna. Kadosh Shivti Lil Yisrael, the Karzal Zevi Amar, Kadosh, 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 and Nights Vod Malachar, it's Kevodo. Tisahini Rach, Veshmachar, Kol Rash, Gadol, Baruch Vedonanai, Mim Komo. Naim Loch, Lelam Vahed. ויפתחו בך ידי שמך, כי לא זפת דרשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר. So it's at this time in our services when in our Zoom and YouTube Shabbat Mincha world, we turn to learning Torah instead of reading Torah from a scroll. We turn to Parshat Vizot HaBracha, which comes from the very end of the book of Devarim. We are nearly at the very end of our Torah scroll, nearly ready to rewind, but not quite yet. We have another holiday or so to go. Holiday 0.5, but you're going to hear more about that holiday and a half in just a little while when we do some learning with our resident Jackie. And we are going to read from Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 33, verses 1 through 17. We come back to Vizot HaBracha several times. We won't come back to it anytime during the course of this. Is that true? No, we'll come back to it Monday, but then we skip it this coming Thursday when we're in the middle of the holiday, and then we'll skip it also on. Well, it's just kind of it's a funky configuration of weeks because then we have special readings for Shabbat Chol HaMoed, and anyway, V'sot Bracha gets repeated over and over again. So we began with a blessing to thank the Holy Blessed One for making it possible for us to have the opportunity to learn Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Mizot habracha asher birach Moshe ish Elohim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto vayomar Adonai misinai ba v'zorach miseir lamo hofia mehar param v'etah merivevot kodesh Mimino eshtat lamo af chovev amim kol kedosha v'yadecha vehem tukul raglecha yisah midabrotecha Torah tzivalanu Moshe Morasha kilat Yaakov vayhi v'shurun melech v'hita seifra sheham yachad shivtei Yisrael yichli Ruven v'al yamot v'himet Tav mispar v'zot lihuda vayomar Shema Adonai kol Yehuda ve'elamo tvienu yadav rav lo ve'ezer mitzarav tihei ulevi yomar Tumecha v'urecha leish chasidecha asher nisito b'matzah terivehu amei meriva haomer le'aviv u'limo lo reitiv v'yetechav lo ikir v'et banav lo yada ki shameru imratecha uvritecha yinsoru yoru mishpatecha li'Yaakov v'toratecha v'Yisrael Yasimu ketorah v'apecha v'chalil al mizbechecha Bareich Adonai chelo ufoal yadav tirtzeh mechatz motnaim kamav sanav mi yikumun Levinyamin amar Yedid Adonai yishkon levetach alav chofev alav kol hayom uvein ketefav shachein Uyosef amar mevorechat Adonai artzo mineged shamay mitahal umithom rovetzet tachat umimeged tevuot shamesh umimeged geresh yerachim umerosh hare kedem umimeged givot olam umimeged eretz umloah urtzon shochni sene tavot Lerosh Yosef will code Nizir Echav Bechor Shoraho Hadar Lo V'Karnerim Karnav Vahem Amim Yinagach Yachtav Afse Aretz Vehem Rivavot Ephraim Vehem Alfei Menashe. So that is our full reading for Parshat Vizot HaBracha. And now that we've completed our reading for Vizot HaBracha, we can return back to our services in just a moment. Before we do, I want to ask if there's anybody who's with us at this time who's anticipating an Al-Maleh being said for a loved one on an anniversary of a yard site. If not, then Jackie is going to lead us over into our whispered private Amidah. We recite this in a whisper individually in our homes. We're going into quiet now. I invite you to use this as your own private time. You can find this on pages, I'm looking at my sheet, pages 223, 234, or 574
in your respective sidorim. Individual quiet Amidah. If you haven't yet completed your own private Amidah, you can continue at your own pace. We continue now with Aleinu on pages 231 or 248 or 598. We rise.
Dinu Shabbat Don Hakol Takeinu La Letzer Breshit Shelo Sanikri Haratzot Velo Samanu Kishvot Adama Shelo Samchokinu Kahem Vegor Aleinu Kachol Hamonam Anachnu Korim Mishtachavim Modim Lifnei Melech Malkei Hamachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Katu b'Torah tachad Anayim loch le'olam vahed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol ha'aretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Mourner's Kaddish is on pages 232, 249, or 600. Jackie can lead us. I'll be the Amen.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'ama divra chirate v'amlich malchute v'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam ulmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei dekudasha b'rechu. Be'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata v'amiran be'ama v'imru Amen. Yehi shalama Rabbah min Shemaya v'chaim alinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom miramav, hu yaseh shalom alinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
Amen. Shar kochach. It's always a wonderful thing when we have rabbinical students, and now in particular, rabbinical students turned interns turned rabbinical residents in our community who are with us to learn from us and sometimes more importantly, teach us and lead us. And today we're lucky to have Jackie with us to teach us for the afternoon. Jackie is going to be spotlit. She's going to teach us for the next while. We have until about 7:20 or so to do learning because Havdalah is at 7:33. So we have the next while to learn. As Jackie is spotlit, I'll sit back here and look forward to learning from you. Jackie, thank you for being with us this afternoon and for teaching us.
Oh, Paula, you're so ready. Great, because you're on for all the Q&A parts of it. All you, Paula. I am so excited for this. So there are so many moments when you go to rabbinical school where people are like, did you always know you wanted to do this? What brought you here? And I have a story, but I think so often I look back at little things and I'm like, oh, that was the moment that someone should have known. And I think it was like 10 years ago, maybe. I don't even remember when like people are like, what's your favorite Jewish holiday? And my answer consistently for a great number of years has now been Shmini Atzeret, which is not like a normal response to that question. I think you will get like Simchat Torah, but you often get Purim or Passover or Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But like most people don't go, I love Shmini Atzeret. Like we should have known then. So this opportunity is really exciting for me to get to talk about something that I love and feel passionate about and also makes most people go, wait, what? So I just want to poll the crowd now that is more than just Paula to put on the spot. Where are people at with Shmini Atzeret? Like when I say Shmini Atzeret, what do people think? What do people know? What are your associations? It could be, I have no idea what you're talking about. It could be confusion. There are no right or wrong answers here.
I think about Yisker.
Yeah. Yisker, Tybal.
I think a lot more about the Atzeret part than the Shmini part.
Okay. Cool.
And I've come to learn that it's its own separate holiday, right? It's not just tagged on at the end of Sukkot, but it's its own day.
Right. So so that was like the perfect, Paula's not a plant, I promise, but that was the perfect, it's its own holiday. And it's so interesting because it's counted with Sukkot. It's the 8th. Shmini is 8, comes from 8. So it's like the 8th day, but it's also its own holiday. So like, what gives? So today I have kind of two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the what, like what actually might Shmini Atzeret be or not be. There's this really interesting machloket, this argument for of what is it really? And then I actually also really want to talk about so what? Like, what does it matter? What is this holiday? Where do we find meaning in this thing that like Cantor 20 belovedly called a half holiday at the end? Like, really, what do we do with this? So on your source sheet, the first one this is where it comes from. This like really, I'll read it in English. The first day shall be, so it's talking about Sukkot to start with, just for some context. I guess I could have brought the one before, sorry, the verse before. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day, you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by fire to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. So in the Hebrew, Bayom Hashmini Mikra Kodesh Yeh Lachem. So on the 8th day, it will be holy for you. Okay, so we have this holiday that it's somewhat singled out and also is the 8th day. And so maybe it's the same, maybe it's separate. And we see this will continue through our liturgy, it is in the liturgy. There are some hints in the liturgy, but through halachic sources that what is it? So we have the next thing I've brought is Shulchan Aruch. So Rav Yosef Karo is a Sephardic halachic source. It is used by Jews all across the world at this point, but it's coming from a Sephardi culture. And then on top of the Shulchan Aruch, you have the Ramah, who's the Ashkenazic gloss. So when customs differ between Ashkenaz, between sort of at the time Western European, but we often think of as Eastern European Jews and Sephardic Jews from Spain, the Ramah will come in and say, like, we do it this way. So here we have the order of the prayers on the 8th night and day, 2 se'ivim. So Shulchan Aruch has 2 things to say to us about Shmini Atzeret. That's it. Whole book's dedicated to Sukkot. You get 2 paragraphs about prayer on Shmini Atzeret. 1, on the night of Shmini Atzeret, we say in the Amidah, and you gave us this 8th day as a festival of Atzeret. So if you're used to saying the Amidah, or you say Ya'aleh v'Yavo, we still have it at Yom Shmini Chag HaAtzeret Hazeh. And we still use this to today. So that's the Sephardic answer. Here's a separate thing. We say, we have one for Sukkot that we say differently in Ya'aleh v'Yavo, and we say it differently in Birkat HaMazon. And here we get something new for Shmini Atzeret, which also is said on Simchat Torah. We keep it the same. So the Ramah then says, we do not refer to the 8th day as a festival, because there is nowhere in Torah that it is called a festival. Rather, we say the 8th day of Atzeret. So he says, Ela Omrim, Yom Shmini Atzeret. We don't call it Chag HaAtzeret, we just call it Shmini Atzeret. Outside of Israel, they eat in the sukkah at night and during the day because it might be the 7th day. They do not bless on this sitting. We say Kiddush V'Shehecheyanu. So here's a couple, in these just short paragraph, we get like 3 really interesting pieces. So first, we get this really interesting thing that like Ashkenazim and Sephardim back in the day felt differently about it. Rav Yosef Karo says it's a holiday. It's its own thing. It's a holiday on its own. And the Ramah comes in and says, we don't treat it that way. We call it something different, but it's not a chag. Then we have the question of outside of Israel. So many of our holidays, all of our holidays, except Rosh Hashanah, which is confusing because we just did that. All of our holidays that are 1 day in Israel are 2 days outside of Israel, in case we may have miscounted. So on Pesach, they do 1 Seder and we do 2 Seders, and we have 2 full days of Chag. So what do we now do? The 7th day, according to the Torah, is holiday. So the 8th day outside of Israel should be holiday, but also now it's its own holiday. So is it the holiday day? Is it Shmini Atzeret? What do we do? And I've brought some other stuff about specifically about sitting in the sukkah, but that's a question. So is it Sukkot 8? Is it Shmini Atzeret? What's happening? So the Ramah gives, they don't bless on this. So normally you would say the bracha that ends l'shev b'sukkah. And so the compromise is we sit in the sukkah in case we've miscounted, but we don't say a bracha on it because it's really not Sukkot anymore. And the last piece that gives us a hint that it's its own holiday is that we say a Kiddush V'Shehecheyanu. So on most holidays, so for example, Pesach, which is the Gemara compares Sukkot and Pesach because they both have Chol HaMoed in the middle. On the last days of Pesach, you don't say Kiddush V'Shehecheyanu because it's still for sure part of Pesach. So another hint is that the halacha decided that when you say Kiddush, you say a Shehecheyanu. So you're saying this is a new holiday. Thank you for bringing me here. So that was a lot. I'm going to pause if there are thoughts or questions or anything other than like, wait, I don't understand because the halacha is confusing. Taiwo.
And I'm trying to look and I'm not succeeding. You brought Vayikra, but there's also Bamidbar 29, 35 to 38. Are they exactly the same thing or does the Hebrew differ?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think I have Bamidbar sitting in front of me. I do have a Mikra Gedolah, but it's Bereshit, so it is not. Oh wait, this is what I have sitting here because what I have for school, I have a Jewish study Bible and Bereshit. Cantor Shorty also seems to be looking, but I appreciate that you pulled up the verses. I did not bring the Devarim verses.
Which verses did you want to compare them to?
Yeah.
It's Bamidbar 29 verses 35 to 38. And just my vision right now isn't going up. I was trying to go back and forth because I can't hold the books. Trying to do it on Macham Emre, and I can't. I keep losing it. If it's exactly the same or not.
Okay. Bamidbar.
You shall observe it as a day when the whole. So. On Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur.
Okay, verses.
Chapter 20. Oh, sorry. 29 verses, I think 35 to 38.
Uh-huh. Bayom Hashmini. Atzeret tihye lachem. Kol melechet avodah lo tasu. V'hikratem ola yishei reach nichoach ladonai. Par echad ayel echad kevasim b'nei shana shivat mimim. Minchatam v'niskehem lapar la'ayel v'la kevasim. V'misparam kamishpat. U'seir chatat echad milvad olata tamid u'minchatat v'niska. That's it. It's just the prescription of the offerings.
So it's giving us, it doesn't necessarily, a little bit it's actually going to come up a little bit in the piece that the Gemara, that of later in a little bit of the so what, it's going to come up the offerings. But as far as telling us exactly, is it Sukkot or is it its own holiday? That doesn't seem to quite help us out at all. It seems to add to the same, what might it be? Okay, I'm going to move on to the Gemara, which actually historically comes before, but I thought the Shulchan Aruch was much clearer about this distinction. So I brought the Gemara after because it's a little Gemara when it says some say, so it reads, some say a different version of the dispute. Everyone agrees that we do not recite the blessing. So there's a clear agreement, no blessing of L'Shev B'Sukkah on Shmini Atzeret on this 8th day. When they disagree, it is with regard to residing in the sukkah. So we all agree, if you go into the sukkah, you don't say a blessing, but the question is about, do you go into the sukkah? Some people have a particular custom on Simchat Torah to this day that they do not go into the sukkah. And there's a lot of halachic literature on if you must use your sukkah, what do you do to make sure it's clear that it's not Sukkot? So the disagreement is about, on this 8th day, do you go in or do you not go in? But if you go in, for sure you don't say a blessing. According to the one who says that the status of the 8th day is like the 7th day, then we reside in the sukkah. So if you think that the 8th day, that Shmini Atzeret is like just the 8th day because we're in the diaspora, then you go into the sukkah. If you think that it's not, and you think that it's a totally separate holiday, the one who says the 8th day, both with regard to this and that, to residing and to blessing, we don't reside in the sukkah. And so Rav Yosef said, so they quote through, and they go through all these things, and they're quoting who does sit in the sukkah and who resides outside the sukkah. And the halacha is, so in Gemara, you don't always get an answer. Sometimes they'll just say teku. And when I was learning this, would not have been surprised with the Gemara just said, we have no idea what you do. But they actually give us the halachic answer. And the halacha is that we reside in the sukkah on the 8th day, with regard to which there is uncertainty that it might be the 7th day, but we do not recite the blessing. So the rabbis of the Gemara say it's for sure not really, 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 really Sukkot to the point where we wouldn't want to say a blessing in vain. But just in case we're wrong, we're still going to sit there. So there's clearly in the time of the Gemara this like tension between what is it? Is it its own? Is it separate? Is it Sukkot? Is it not? And so we have that. And then I'm going to bring one more piece from Sukkah in the evidence that it's its own holiday. So Rabbi Yochanan said that one recites the blessing, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this time on the 8th day of the festival. So he's quoting Shachlianu, the blessing of time, Omrim Zman Bishmini Shel Chag. So we bless that we got to this occasion, which we only do on a new holiday. And he brings the example, like I was talking about earlier, one does not recite the blessing of time on the seventh day because it's not a festival distinct from Passover. So here he's explaining, and there's a really interesting question that I think for me really sits with me is Rabbi Yochanan saying this, we should do this because it's a separate holiday? Or is he saying this is what we already know that we do, and therefore we're using it as proof that it's a separate holiday? And this is a fun thing that I think Gemara does, is it doesn't always tell you which one it is. So it might be proving your point, and it might be using to prove the point. So there's one more piece. There's one piece for Tehillim of, is this one more piece of evidence in the camp of it's own holiday? The Levi'im in the times of the temple would recite a psalm on each day of Sukkot. And on Shmini Atzeret, they would recite a different one that started Lam Natzech al Hashmini, Mizmor LeDavid, on a psalm for the leader on the 8th. So we have that. And I also brought a couple more sources of how we know. The Musaf offering is also different from all of the offerings, both the holiday offering and the Musaf offering are different on Shmini Atzeret than they are on Sukkot. They're totally separate, which I'll talk about later in the kind of so what, because I think it's really interesting. The psalm is different, and the Kiddush is different also. We get the Shechianu, but we also get Shmini Atzeret HaChag Hazeh. We get that same language that we saw earlier, and we get that instead of our Kiddush. We say Yisker, as Paula said, which if it was part of Sukkot, would we do it there? Would we do it at the beginning? There's a question. And we have this very cool prayer that I think, if I remember correctly, Cantor Torney really likes. I could be wrong, but I think is Geshem, is we begin our prayer for rain on Shmini Atzeret. And so it would be interesting that we would tie it. It seems strange if it's the last day. Why would we tie it to kind of the end? In Judaism, we kind of think of the beginning as the exciting part. It's new and exciting. And so it might be a little strange to tie it to the end of this very long holiday. So that's sort of the what is it? Does anyone have any thoughts maybe now that are different about it being two separate, or one more confused, less confused? Does it feel any different now, kind of knowing what it is? Yeah, Gary.
Just making it the start of the season. It seems to be a transitional one. I like that, the fact that Geshem starts now, as opposed to, because that means that's a separation. That makes it a special thing and allows me to see that it's a separate, and you start with a new transition now.
Yeah, I love that you called it a transition. I'm going to hold on to that because I think it's really going to kick in at the end of this. But I love that this liturgy, this really important liturgy. Rabbi Kligfeld spoke last night about rain in his Vort on the Parsha on Ha'azinu, about rain, about how sometimes rain is such a crisis and such an emergency that we need rain, that there's a whole thing about fasting for rain. And so we know that we wouldn't hold it off, and it's marking the beginning of this new season that's really crucial and really important. I like that a lot. Yeah, Cantor Torney.
I did not enjoy my experiences of Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah as one day in Israel. It was a frustrating collapse of that experience. Trying to do Yizkor, trying to do Geshem, and trying to honor the feeling of Simchat Torah and everybody coming to the Torah on that one day was too many moods and too much ritual for one day in my experience. And I did it in an indie minyan, an independent minyan in Israel once. I did it in a standard Masorati minyan another time. Both times when I was living in Israel, I was there other times on Shmini Atzeret. And I felt that it was too much collapse as a lived experience. So one of the things that I can appreciate about what you're saying, but I'm wrestling with as a part of the original design or not, is that I do think that it makes sense ritually and liturgically as a teased out holiday, because
its themes do seem unique and necessarily so from the ones that get celebrated on Simchat Torah.
That's so interesting. So it's interesting that I unintentionally but drew this distinction between Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. Like I had come in to draw the distinction between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. And it's so interesting now to draw that line also between Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, which I love and I didn't even think about consciously, but like I feel that. Like I can't imagine, I will experience it, God willing, next year actually, terrifyingly enough, but like I can't imagine doing that all in one day and what that feels like. Tybal.
So I had to start, get a different virtual background for this, because to me, Sukkot is primarily about the cycle of the 7 species, which also speaks to starting the cycle again with Geshem. But Simchas Torah isn't, that when there are always 3 ways to three, how many, but 3 ways we slice, slice is not a good word, 3 lenses for holidays, agricultural in Israel, historical, liturgical, I'm sure there are more. Shmini Atzeret and Sukkot, which to me are different because Sukkot is ending last cycle of 7 species, even though the olive harvest has started. It will not be complete until Hanukkah, but we know how it's going to be in theory in Israel. Shmini Atzeret starts that, and Simchas Torah is something completely different because that's liturgical. It's certainly not agricultural. It's not historical in the sense that Torah isn't historical.
Yeah, Simchat Torah actually comes, I tiptoed into it when I was putting this together, and then I was like, that's too far of a tiptoe. Like that's going to send me down a totally different tangent. But like where Simchat Torah comes from is also really fascinating. And it has to do, I'm sure there are other sources, but the ones I read all had to do with the Satan and like tempting. And it was very interesting and totally another class's worth of material. So I want to come back to this question of so what? So we kind of see we have this different holiday, but like, so what? How do we do this? What are we doing? What's the meaning and what's the feeling in this? Like I said, this is my favorite holiday. So I've got the next 2 sources go together. Rashi is commenting on, I believe, on this verse that we started with. And he's telling a story from the Gemara. You can read it if you would like. I'm going to summarize what happens. The Gemara and Rashi actually bring 2 slightly different versions of this story. So it's interesting that Rashi says this is where he's quoting from. But Rashi brings the story that it's like, so it comes from Atzer, to hold back. And so he's saying that it's a case of a king who invited people for a banquet and said, come stay 1 more day. Don't leave yet. And so that's kind of the big picture of maybe it's God saying, like, just 1 more day. We started this season. Again, there's so many places you could mark that we start this season. If you have read This Is Real and you're completely unprepared, you might have started at Tisha B'Av. We may have started at the beginning of Elul. We may have started at Slichot. We may have started on Rosh Hashanah. Unclear, but I will say if you start with Slichot, we started at Temple Beth Am with this concept of intimacy and distance, and we've been coming closer and closer, and we're here in this moment, and God says, don't go yet. And for me, that's so powerful that like here it is. Rabbi Joshua Rosowski spoke about how on Yom Kippur, where you see the judge, we sing in major key because you're approaching the creator and it's your parent in heaven, your divine parent, and that's who you're appealing to. And here we see that again. We see a God who wants to be close to us, who says, I'm not ready for you to leave. Give me 1 more day. I'm not a parent, but I imagine that's how parents feel. Like, I imagine that's how my mom feels when I go home. Like, 1 more day, come on, nuke, stay. And so the piece from Sukkah is very interesting. It's the same story. It's where Rashi's pulling this from, but it explains it in a slightly different way. So over the holiday of Sukkot, 70 bulls are sacrificed. We'll read each morning in the Torah reading what the sacrifice was. And it ends up being 70 bulls corresponding to the 70 nations. And on the 8th day, one single bull is sacrificed. The Gemara says corresponding to Israel. And it says, the Gemara brings a parable of a king who said, prepare a great feast for several days. And on the last day, he said to his beloved, the Gemara calls it beloved, prepare a small feast. And so it's this same story, but a little bit different. And so it's still, again, that God is seeking out the Jewish people. Rashi uses parent and child. The Gemara uses a beloved. And either way, it's really God calling to us and saying, sit for one more day, which I just love, I think, for me so much. The next piece is really what got me, but like way back when. But this I love that I keep saying it, but it's so powerful to me that we've spent all of this time with God. I know when I travel and stay with people and when I visit friends, sometimes enough is enough. I'm sold out by the end of it. Maybe God is tired of us. And instead of sending us home, God says, one more day. That's all I'm asking. And so the last piece is really, which I didn't even put a source for. So not the last piece that you have. I have a little piece that I didn't put in. This is my Jackie Honig magic. This is what I love. So this is my one piece of Kabbalah that I just absolutely am in love with. I love the 8th day of every holiday. Achron Shel Pesach is my favorite day of Pesach. Shmini Atzeret, I love the 8th day of Hanukkah. Because we have this concept of 8. So if we think about pop quiz, think about the number 7. What are things that come to mind when we think of the number 7, either in the world as it exists or in Judaism, sort of whatever it is? Tybal.
It's the only part of the calendar which is a Jewish definition, though it's universal, because everything else, a month, a day, a year, one can see from astronomy. So the 7 is the new thing.
Yeah, I love that. So seven days of the week, right? You're talking about that everything else.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's created, right? 7 is artificially created. So we've got, and created arguably from creation, from the 7 days of creation, God created 6, and on the 7th day, God rested.
Right.
What else?
Which would mean that God created it too, and the whole created with words, not with clay, not with wood. I mean, the foundational narrative is with words, and that links to the 7.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got 7 there. Can anyone think of anything else that's 7?
7
Paula.
species. 7 species.
Yeah, the seven species in Israel.
Yeah.
We've also got in thanks, Tybal's bringing it back. In some classical Jewish sources, we've got 7 days before a Brit Milah. The Brit Milah happens on 8. 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. The temple's menorah was 7 branches, but these are 2 new ones that I learned this week when I was doing some research. There are 7. Well, I knew that there were 7 colors of the rainbow, but I never connected it. That there's also 7 colors of the rainbow, and there's 7 notes on a musical scale. That it's considered complete when you have the 7 notes. Tybal.
And I don't remember, and I can't look it up, but if anyone else remembers, in the Gemara where they tell us how many female prophets there were, was that 7?
That I don't know off the top of my head.
Let me see if I can find it.
We will come back to that. So 7, so we have all these examples. So 7 is considered to be this natural number. And then 8 in Kabbalah is considered to be one beyond the natural order. That we have the 8 days of Hanukkah, that was every day was a miracle, and the 8 is the miracle of Hanukkah. The 8th, the 7th to some extent, and the 8th day of Pesach, the sea was split on the 7th day of Pesach. There's a custom that it was split on the 7th night and they crossed over, and the 8th day is this miraculous day that they were free on the other side. The dedication of the tabernacle was also an 8-day celebration. So we have all of these things where 8 is beyond. And I think for me, this has always stuck with me because it takes something beyond nature to do this one more time. By the end of Sukkot, I am exhausted. I think so many of us are. We are shuled out. We are tired. And we are on this holiday, Sukkot, we are commanded to be happy, which is, again, whole different lesson in and of itself. But Simchat Torah, but Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, we go and we dance and we party and we sing and we drink and we are merry. And we do this from some magical something inside of us that wells up in this final day that really just takes over. At least for me, like, it takes a lot to summon it. And once I'm there, it feels magical. Like, there's no explanation for it. And I think that for me is what has always stuck with me is we get this day, and we get this day where God is asking us, stay one more day. God is coming to us and saying, you are my people, you are my child. Please give me one more day at the end of all of this. And we are pushing beyond nature and saying, okay, let's do this one more time. Let's come back and let's be in it. And it also, I actually want to read, there's one more source on here that I found that I love. Does someone want to read this as sort of the punchline wrap up it goes well with what Gary said if you want to read Gary, but I won't put you on the spot.
We're talking about the one with Rabbi Aaron London.
Yes.
So what is Shmini Atzeret? Is a day for us to think about everything that we just went through over the past month. It's a way for us to stop and to appreciate the holiday. Take in all that we can. There's an opportunity to appreciate the extra time that we have with God. There's a chance to appreciate the extra time with our friends and family. It is a time to appreciate the lack of routine in our lives. It is a way for us to stop, mentally prepare ourselves for what we will be coming next, for what Charei Hachayim Hadim will be.
So like after the Chagim, I love this. This is what it is. It's this pause for me. I invoke and imagine this picture of a deep breath. As I've spent more time in singing communities like at Beth Am, there's this beautiful moment often at Hamalot and sometimes at Sovev and all, when we all sing and it comes to this incredible climax and then there's silence and everyone just stops and just takes a breath and then continues on. And that, I think, is what this is getting to. And that's what Shmini Atzeret can be for us, instead of it having to be, have to go back to shul, have to dance with the Torah, have to stand there while we listen to a beautiful Geshem, but it does make for a very long day, have to do all of these things. It's an opportunity to sit and linger just a little bit longer, to sit and take that deep breath.
Johnny doesn't like the holiday.
And gather ourselves.
You're muted.
And take a deep breath and prepare ourselves for what's next by holding on to it and by kind of drawing back in a little bit of that holiday magic and a little bit of that beyond nature and just being present. And so that's my hope for all of us, for all of you, that this Simchat Torah, maybe Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, you find a little more meaning and a little more place to take a breath and hold it in and hold on to that one last day with God and together in this holiday and really enjoy it. So I hope to see many of you over the coming week or two until our holiday and a half letter left. Well, and Hoshana Rabbah might also be a half holiday. To be determined.
Yishar Kochach, Jackie. That was a really fantastic teaching, and maybe I'm ready for Sukkot. I'm definitely ready for Shmini Atzeret now. Chag Hashmini Ha'atzeret Hazeh. I always get that wrong in the liturgy.
There's so many words in the right order, and they just it doesn't flow nicely.
It doesn't, but it means a lot. Chag Hashmini. We're going to continue with Ma'ariv now for Motzei Shabbat, for the going out of Shabbat. It begins on page 264 in the Lev Shalem Sidor, in page 281 in the newer Sim Shalom, and page 200 in the older Sim Shalom. We begin seated since we skip the Baruch Hu, as we're doing this in an online constituted minyan. Again, 264, 281, or 200.
Mehu rachumi chaver v'melo yashchit v'hirba v'yeshiva po v'lo yair kol chamato Adonai Yoshia melech yaneinu v'yom koreinu baruch atah Adonai. Mavir yom mevi laila, mavdil ben yom vin laila Adonai tzvahut shemo. El chavekayem tamidim lo chalenu leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai hamari v'aravim. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael machav. V'ahavat achal tasir mimenu leolamim. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. El melech ne'eman. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher tzeitzei etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lechem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emet v'emunah kosav v'kayam aleinu ki hu Adonai Elohim. Umalchuto v'ratzon kimelu aleihem Moshe u'vnei Yisrael lechanu shirah V'simcha raba v'meru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh norati lo tosef elem malchutecha reu v'necha v'kayam lifnei Moshe zeili anu v'yameru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed ונאמר כיבד אדוני את יעקב, וגילו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, קהל ישראל. השכיבנו אדוני, אלוהינו לשלום. ושמור צאתנו ואוהנו לחיים ושלום יטה ויד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני, שמר עמו ישראל לעד. Baruch Adonai le'olam amen v'amen. כי המלכות שלך היא ולא מעט תמלוך בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. We turn now to the whispered private Amidah for the end of Shabbat. You can find it in your Sidurim on pages 270 or 286 or 210. It's recited standing and privately. Don't forget, if you're using a Siddur where this is the usual Mariv Amidah, that in that first paragraph inside the Amidah, there's a special insertion for Havdalah for the end of Shabbat. Yai nai 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 yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 yai nai 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 nai. Ya nai 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 nai. Ya nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 yo. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Hai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. Yai nai 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 nai. We turn to Aleinu, page 281, or page 297 or 696. We rise. Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol l'teked l'lathi sabri shitula. Kakatu v'tor tafnu. ונאמר ויהי אדוני למלך כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We turn to the psalm for this season, which we say all the way through Hoshana Rabbah, through the next to last, to the day before Shmini Atzeret. Heretofore it will be known as. You can find the reference to whatever page you can find that psalm on at the end, at the bottom of Aleinu. So at the end of Aleinu, your Siddur should send you there. If you're in Lev Shalom, that's on page 59. L'David, Adonai ori, v'yishimi mihira, Adonai ma'os chayai, mimi evchai, v'krov ha'lemirim. Lulehem manti liru petuv, Adonai be'eretz chaim, kaveh el Adonai, chazak v'yemetz libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. Invite you to turn to pages 282 or 298 or 698 for Mourner's Kaddish. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yamechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'imru amen, yehi shemei rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lamei omaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yit ba'ar v'yit ramam v'yit naseh, v'yit hadar v'yit ale v'yit halal, shemei tekudcha berichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechamata, damiram be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Thanks everybody for being here this afternoon and this evening. Jackie, we wish you a Yishar Kochach on a beautiful teaching about Shmini Atzeret, Chag Hashmini HaAtzeret Hazeh, that is coming up in just a few days. A reminder that tomorrow morning, Minyan is at 8 in the morning in person, online only, online 8 in the morning, and in the evening times, also online on Sunday, and then Monday morning again, online Minyan at 7:30 in the morning, and beginning Monday evening, you can find both in-person and online Minyanim as the holiday of Sukkot begins. I look forward to seeing many of you both in person and online over the holiday. I encourage you to go to our website after Shabbat in 1 minute. If you want to know any more of the details, there should be lulavim and etrogim available on campus if you've not yet picked yours up and you ordered it, and you need those for the holiday. We always have ones available to not borrow, but actually take from us. And if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to share that halacha. That's a teaser for you. Come to synagogue, even if you don't have a lulav or etrog, and we're happy to make sure that you have one to shake and sniff on the holiday. And we have services both in the mornings and evenings in person and online all throughout the first 2 days of Yom Tov, throughout Monday evening through Wednesday evening, and then during Chol HaMoed, Shabbat, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go get my Havdalah set since the clock has ticked over, and then we'll do Havdalah together. I welcome you to do the same. Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'chol.
Jackie, while she's doing that, I looked fast. Also for me, I'm 3 hours earlier, so it isn't Shabbos anymore when I'm doing all this. It's Megillah 14a and b. There are 48 male prophets and there are 7 female prophets.
I'm so excited. I'm actually studying Megillah with a friend. We're actually starting, we started and then we didn't get very far, and we're starting up again. So I'm so excited to get there. This is going to be my jam. That's very cool.
Okay. Family is very excited that Havdalah time is here at such a reasonable hour. This is about my favorite time of year, by the way. You know, my husband is from Bogota, Colombia, which is an equatorial city, which means that this is the time year round for roughly for sundown on Friday and for Havdalah. I didn't know that until I went and visited down there, that's how this works, right? When you're close to the equator, it's like much more standard year round. Things I didn't understand about the way time works. And this is my favorite balance of time of year. About 6:30 start, 7:30 end. I can get on board with that. Lighting my candle, if I can get it to click. All the safety mechanisms on my clicker. Okay. Yanai nanai nai 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 yanai nanai nai yanai yanai nanai nai 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 yanai nanai nai 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 hai nanai nai 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 hai nanai nai 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 oh hai nanai nai 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 hai nanai nai 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 Hini el Yeshuati Heftach v'lo echad Ki yosi v'sivaraja Adonai v'yehi li lishua U'shavtamayim v'sason V'mayne ha-Yeshua L'Adonai ha-Yeshua Alamcha techatecha sela Adonai Tzevaot Imanu Liskav Lainu Elohei Yaakov Sela Adonai Tzevaot Ashrei Adam Poteach Bach Adonai Hoshia Hamelech Yaneinu V'yom Koreinu Yehudim Ha'itorah V'simcha v'sason V'gar Kein Di'elanu Kos Yeshuot tesa, uv'shem Adonai ekra, yainanai, 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 yainanai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei midei besamim. Star anise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael la'amim, ben yom ha'shavi. L'sheshet yemei hama'aseh, Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. Eliyahu hanavi, Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu hagiladi, imera ve'yameinu, yavo Eloheinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. May we be safe. May we be free. May we find space to just be. Ken yehi ratzon, ken yehi ratzon. May we find our way back home. Ken yehi ratzon, ken yehi ratzon. May we find our way back home. Bye, everybody. Shavua tov. See you soon.
Shavua tov. Nice cat.
Thank you. This is Oscar. If anybody wants a cat, he's perpetually up for rehoming and adoption. You're welcome to have him. He's the sweetest cat in the world. He'd like a quieter home. So if you want him, you can have him.
He has good taste.
That's very sweet. Bye.
Bye. Shavua tov.